This week on Worldview, after the military success of Operation Sindoor, what are India's diplomatic challenges? How should it deal with countries that supported Pakistan during the four-day conflict? And how damaging to bilateral India-US ties are Trump's claims of mediating the ceasefire? We'll also take a look at the diplomatic next steps. Hello, I'm Suhasini Heather, and this is Worldview. Now, a week later, the India-Pakistan ceasefire that was agreed to on May the 10th has more or less held. Operation Sindoor, remember, was launched in response to the Pahalgam terror attacks in which 26 people were killed. And that operation was launched on May 7th, in fact, the night of 6th and 7th. And since then, the Indian military has already issued several statements on its successes in meeting its objectives. Now, what were those objectives? One, hitting terror infrastructure across Pakistan, in fact, talking about 9 different areas and 24 sites on those 9 different terror infrastructure sites, and they say they've killed about 100 terrorists. Second objective, hitting Pakistani military bases in a way they probably have not done ever in the past, and certainly not since 1971. Third, defending Indian bases from the Pakistani onslaught, in particular India's air defense, drones, UAVs, including many indigenously made hardware, have contributed to what is being seen by the government really as a huge success. On its side, Pakistan has claimed that, amongst other things, it has shot down up to 5 Indian fighter jets. Several international media like New York Times, CNN have also reported about this, but it's a claim that India has not confirmed or not denied either. Here's, in fact, the Indian Air Force's response to a question from my colleague at The Hindu, Dinkar Peri.
Pakistan claiming that Rafale has been downed, etc. Can you put that question to rest and clarify on that?
I guess that question is for me. All right, I'm happy that you've asked this question. You know, we are in a combat scenario, and losses are a part of combat. The question that you must ask us, okay, and indeed that we must ask ourselves, you inclusive, is have we achieved our objectives? Have we achieved our objective of decimating that terrorist camp? And the answer is a thumping yes. And the results are for the whole world to see.
Politically, Prime Minister Modi has said that Operation Sindoor has established a new normal. Just what does this new normal mean? Let's just unpack it. He used his own words, but here's what the government is basically saying. One, that any terror attack of the future is an act of war. This is certainly new and can be controversial because it questions whether you can react to every terror attack without necessarily investigation as an act of war and then retaliate. The second, in fact, is that India won't be deterred by the nuclear risk. Remember, India and Pakistan, 2 nuclear powers, and Pakistan regularly uses what India calls nuclear blackmail. So India says that is not going to deter it in the future, as it didn't in this operation. The third, that India will hit Pakistan directly for sponsoring terror groups, not distinguishing between state and non-state actors. That is really what the government wants you to believe is the new normal that they have established. Listen in to what Prime Minister Modi said in an address to the nation.
हम आतंक की सरपरस्त सरकार और आतंक के आकाओं को अलग अलग नहीं देखेंगे। ऑपरेशन सिंदूर के दौरान दुनिया ने पाकिस्तान का वो घिनौना सच फिर देखा है जब मारे गए आतंकियों को विदाई देने पाकिस्तानी सेना के बड़े बड़े अफसर उमड़ पड़े। स्टेट स्पॉन्सर्ड टेररिज्म का ये बहुत बड़ा सबूत है। हम भारत और अपने नागरिकों को किसी भी खतरे से बचाने के लिए लगातार निर्णायक कदम उठाते रहेंगे।
Now, of course, over there he was referring to this photograph of a funeral in Muridke where a US designated Lashkar-e-Toiba terrorist, so this is someone who was designated way back in 2010, Hafiz Abdul Rauf, in fact led the prayers there. In fact, Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri had even held up this photograph at his press conference last week. So where do the challenges to this new normal that the government has now established really come from? Because we are seeing a certain misgiving about India's diplomatic standing after this. The first, unlike the past, India did not share evidence in the Pahalgam attack before its operations to show that terrorists were linked to Pakistan before carrying out those cross-border strikes also. Remember, security forces have still not tracked down any of the men who carried out the killings. And this idea that without evidence they can go ahead has somehow set off some alarm in a few capitals around the world. The second, that nuclear issues will always trigger warnings worldwide. Reports that India's attack on Pakistan's Maruf base also hit a nuclear site in the Kirana Hills just behind, activated many international capitals to get involved. And we'll tell you a bit about that. Third, while all countries condemned the Pahalgam attack, all of them came to India's support over the Pahalgam attack, given its barbarity, given the cruelty of that attack. And none really stopped India from launching Operation Sindoor on terror infrastructure. The skirmishes that followed between India and Pakistan brought many countries out to call for de-escalation and then mediation between Delhi and Islamabad. And we saw that back and forth telephone calls travel by the US, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Iran, until there was a ceasefire. The lesson really over here is that India's fight on terrorism will always be backed. A war with Pakistan won't have quite so many takers. Fourth, India has to think about the military and diplomatic support that countries like China, Turkey, and Azerbaijan gave Pakistan. Malaysia's call for an independent inquiry also struck a discordant note, as did statements by the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, which all of its 57 members had signed on to. Fifth, the biggest diplomatic challenge at the moment to India is coming from US President Donald Trump. In 6 statements over 6 days, and we're just still counting, Trump has really violated every Indian diplomatic principle, provided a narrative that ran counter to India. So Trump said he mediated the ceasefire, and the MEA has issued a very stern rebuttal to that, saying no, this was actually negotiated bilaterally. Second, Trump hyphenated India with Pakistan. He said he used trade as a threat to make them both stop military action. He called them both great nations. This is not something India has heard for several decades. The third, Trump internationalized the Kashmir dispute. He offered to mediate to end what he wrongly called a centuries-old dispute. Fourth, in none of those statements following the ceasefire did Trump actually refer to India's core concerns of terrorism and the Pahalgam terror attack. In a sign the government does want to dispel some of those worries, it's planning a number of multi-party delegations to different capitals to explain its position in the next few weeks. So what are the diplomatic next steps for India? Regardless of what the US does or says, India has to continue on its path of holding terrorists to account and trying to get the international community in on it. The first is the counter-terror diplomacy will have to be re-energized in a sense. In fact, a team has already gone from the government, held meetings in New York this week, and they've met the 1267 monitoring team, the UNOCT, the CTED, all these counter-terror agencies at the UN, and discussed the listing in particular of TRF, the resistance front that claimed credit or claimed responsibility for the Pahalgam terror attack, and they wanted listed as a globally designated terror group. Second is the diplomacy with the UN Security Council members. This is a bigger challenge at the moment since Pakistan is in the UN Security Council until the end of 2026 and has, along with China, already amended the statements put out that had named the TRF and will no doubt block any listing requests as well, whether they're successful or not. India could start by ensuring that the United States designates TRF as a foreign trade organization, and also India goes back to the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, asking for more strictures against Pakistan. Then there's the question of the Indus Water Treaty. while bilateral dialogue between India and Pakistan is really unlikely on all issues. What we've seen in the last few days is Pakistan backing down from its previous position and asking to discuss the changes to the Indus Water Treaty that India had earlier asked for, obviously hoping for some kind of review of the Indus Water Treaty suspension. Thus far, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has been categorical. Until terror ends, there will be no review of that Indus Water Treaty. The next place India needs to look is at those countries, as I said, that seem to have given their support to Pakistan in that 4-day skirmish conflict after Operation Sindoor began. So India must think about how to deal with China, where of course it's in the middle of rapprochement talks, with Turkey that India had only recently helped during its earthquake, Malaysia, whose Prime Minister was in India for a state visit last year. At present, the government seems to be limiting itself to temporarily banning the media, and then there are calls by groups linked to the government to boycott tourism in these countries. But it remains to be seen what the government plans to do in the long term. And you can watch a conversation about these issues and many more that we had at The Hindu with former Deputy NSA Pankaj Saran, Kalol Bhattacharjee and Dinkar Perry, my colleagues. The link is given below. Here's what Mr. Saran said.
On the question of mediation, where he talks about, getting India and Pakistan to sit together and solve those issues of what he calls 1,000-year-old issues, listen, that's not happening. Whatever little I know of the government, I can clearly tell you there is no way in which this is going to lead to India sitting on a table with Pakistan to discuss Kashmir. That is not happening.
In fact, I've written about what India's options beyond the strikes can be, not revenge or retaliation, but a paradigm shift, where I speak about a number of ideas, including the old 2003 to 2008 idea of making the LOC, the line of control, much more like the international boundary. So what's Worldview's take? This is the time for India to consolidate its diplomatic capital to ensure international pressure is brought on Pakistan to show some action on terrorism. Delhi must not allow Islamabad to provoke it into changing that narrative from a counter-terror war to an India-Pakistan war, one loaded with nuclear tensions. Instead, as it has since 2008, India will have to keep pressing the international community, the IMF, the World Bank, the FATF, and the UN Security Council to work together on somehow squeezing Pakistan's support for terror proxies. Instead of Worldview's normal reading recommendations of books, because I've given you so many names, you can actually read my review of some of these books in The Hindu. This is on options that India has taken thus far in dealing with terrorism. And in times of such disinformation, these are books that contain records, archives, and personal accounts. So we hope you enjoy reading the review as well as the books, and join us again here on Worldview from the team. Thanks for watching.